I wish I had time to respond to all the questions and issues raised, but I'm afraid it will be way beyond the limits of this session. But I hope that during Q&A session, I will be able to address some of these issues and within this dialogue to satisfy your curiosity. First of all, my thanks to the organizers. It's hard to believe that after 25 years of this extensive travel, it is my first trip to continental Asia. So it's a rare honor to be here in India, the birthplace of my preferred game of chess. Chess is considered to be complex, but I have to confess, for me, the Indian favorite sport, cricket, is far more complicated. And I can offer you a deal. I will explain you everything about the Sicilian defense if you can explain to me why a Googly isn't a technology company in California. The current world chess champion hails from India. My old friend and opponent, Viswanathan Anand, or Vishy, as I always call him. And the day I retired in March 2005, almost 4 years ago, in the Spanish city of Linares, where Anand is playing actually today, it's the last round of this traditional tournament, I told Vishy, where we sat at the final dinner, that now he was the old guy in the chess world. But his hair isn't even gray yet. I know there's a habit of Indian sportsmen entering politics, so watch out when Vishy retires. At least in India, he can enter, unlike in Putin's Russia, a free and fair elections. To illustrate the problems we face in Russia, here is a photo from our typical polling station at last year's election. So I'm often asked if Dmitry Medvedev, the man appointed by Putin, is really in charge in Russia today. And I answer with another joke, that in Russia we say that if you get to vote twice for Putin, then you get his third term for free. So sadly, the present memories I had of my 1995 World Championship match against Vishy Anand in New York were destroyed, along with the World Trade Center, where the match took place on the 107th floor. And believe it or not, the first game took place on September 11. And the honorary first move was made by Mayor Rudy Giuliani. The great thing about this picture, you cannot duplicate it anymore. So 9/11 was a shock around the world, even here in India, where you have lived with terrorism for decades. It sent a chilling message that the world was changing, even if the great powers refused to acknowledge it. That is the first and the most important message of change. It is happening whether you like it or not. If there is rain, you can complain about the weather, you can take an umbrella, but you cannot stop the rain. You can ignore change, join it, or try to control it, but it's happening on a permanent and accelerating basis. Positive change is nearly impossible without the courage, a word I will use many times here today. As Nehru said it well, the policy of being too cautious is the greatest risk of all. In politics, as in the business world and in the natural world, the status quo is always dying. The status quo is always dying. This is simply Darwin's law. 150 years ago, he wrote, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is the most adaptable to change." The one that is the most adaptable to change. This is also true for systems of government and international institutions. And even though we are in time of great change and turmoil, they are not adapting nearly fast enough. Consider President Hoover saying the economy was strong in December 1929, and Bush and then John McCain echoing him quite recently. Optimism is fine, but at some point it becomes blatant dishonesty, which further destroys the trust of the people in their leaders. Let me read a few statements from Russian officials regarding the devaluation of ruble, of our currency, over the past 6 months. And this chart I'll show it now, also demonstrates the actual value. Okay, look who's talking. August 1st, 2008, dollars worth 23 rubles, 42 kopecks. September 18, 25.52. We are not threatened by the devaluation of the ruble today. Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Zhukov. October 22nd, 26.44. Now Vladimir Putin says not to buy foreign currency with rubles because of the uncertain future of the dollar. October 29, 27.30. Now President Medvedev. I have kept all my bank accounts in rubles. I'm sure of my savings, and I'm sure of other Russian investors are not in danger. Good for him. December 26, 28.67. Deputy Chairman of Bank of Russia, Alexei Ulukayev. Rumors of a central bank devaluation are nonsense. January 28, 32.99. Head of the saving bank, German Gref, the largest Russian bank. The main stage of the devaluation of the ruble is over. We can expect other currencies to devalue now. This week, it was fluctuating around 36 rubles, a fall of 55% from August. The entire time, the leaders of the Putin administration were telling stories that would make Hoover and Bush blush. Medvedev said after he took office last year that Russia would become a global financial center and that the ruble would become a preferred reserve currency in the world. Now, he was half right. The ruble is becoming a reserve currency in Russia. Now, when things look bad, maintaining the status quo can feel like a victory. But usually, this just postpones disaster. The status quo is what led you to the crisis. Believing that status quo can be rescued is the greatest mistake. It never can. It can only be changed to your advantage or disadvantage. So how to solve problems that are threatening to overwhelm your entire system of problem solving? In 2006, I spoke at the centenary celebration to honor the great Austrian mathematician Kurt Gödel in Vienna. Gödel was as crucial and revolutionary for mathematics in the 20th century as Einstein was for physics. With some imagination, several of his important theories have relevance outside of mathematics and into our realm of strategic thinking. One states that every system will contain a problem that cannot be solved from within the system itself. Cannot be solved from within the system itself. When known methods cannot provide solutions, you must examine your methods and look outside the system to rise above it. It's difficult to realize in time that a new framework is required, and it's even harder to have the spirit to make the change. So looking back through history, great changes in the framework between nations has been necessary after a period of great conflict. 1648, the Peace of Westphalia created the modern age of Europe after the 30 Years' War. In 1815, the Congress of Vienna created a new European map after the defeat of Napoleon's France. And at the Berlin Conference of 1879, the equilibrium was reestablished after the Russian-Turkish War. At the end of the 19th century, the general belief was that this balance created in 1879, would lead to a golden era of peace. Utopian and pacifist literature dreamed of a world without borders, right up to the beginning of World War I. And after the First World War, we had the Versailles Treaty and the creation of the League of Nations. The League was a failure, a total failure, and the unwillingness to accept this fact led to a great degree to the World War II. On March 5th, 1946, in Fulton, Missouri, in his renowned Iron Curtain speech, Winston Churchill spoke about the new dangers to freedom, this time from communism. It's almost forgotten that he also warned in this speech how the newly formed United Nations could lead to corruption and gridlock. Today, we are stuck with an outdated Cold War organization that was developed after World War II to prevent a nuclear clash between superpowers. It and its mission became obsolete after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Instead of an entity that excels at freezing conflicts, we need one that can offer us real solutions. The old stalemate diplomacy of the Cold War will not help us against suicide attacks. Consider the G8, or as I prefer to call it, G7+1. It is supposed to be a group of the great industrial democracies. So how does Russia qualify? It's certainly not a democracy, and if Putin stays in charge much longer, it will not be an industrial nation either, but another version of petrostate. The world has passed this group by as nations like India and Brazil go forward on their own and in the more dynamic groups like G20. As usual, the people and events are ahead of the bureaucracies. Attempting to postpone change, especially in the political realm, nearly always makes the inevitable crisis much worse. The United States suffered greatly from its inability to implement evolutionary reforms at the early stage in its history. The slavery debate was put off until it collided explosively with the equally contentious issue of state rights. Both issues had proved impossible for the founding fathers, but postponing the confrontation eventually resulted in the devastation of the American Civil War. The man who has faced with that war, Abraham Lincoln, who was born 200 years ago this year, coincidentally on the exact same day as Charles Darwin. And apart from his fine intellect, Lincoln possessed the key ingredient to be the perfect agent of change: courage. It would have been easy. It would have been very easy to let the Southern slave states go or to continue to compromise. But Lincoln took a stand. And in April 2011, at the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, a black man will be addressing the American nation from the White House. On this date, March 7th, 1965, March 7th, 1965, the first large civil rights march in the American South took place in Selma, Alabama. The peaceful marchers were attacked by the police, and so many were injured that the day was remembered as Black Sunday, Bloody Sunday, Bloody Sunday. Because of their courage, because of Lincoln's courage, today the United States has a black president, not to mention a newly elected black Republican Party chairman. And what about Bobby Piyush Jindal, the first Indian-American governor who has become a leading national spokesman for the Republican Party? Just 45 years ago, Jindal's skin color would make it difficult for him to vote in some parts of Louisiana, the state where he's now a governor. Back in history, 35 years before that march in Alabama, but on the same date, March the 7th, 1930, Mahatma Gandhi issued his appeal for a general strike. And a few days later began his famous Salt Satyagraha and the March to Dundee. A generation later, Martin Luther King and those American Alabama marchers would learn Gandhi's lesson and duplicate his efforts and his success. It is important to remember that these famous moments in history did not directly lead to changes in policy at the time. Their greatest impact was on people they represented, to inspire them and to show that resistance was possible. They shaped the change and made positive revolution inevitable. These historic accounts are more than a list of cautionary tales. We have to ask if we are allowing our fear if we are allowing our fear to overcome our need for change and progress. Looking back across centuries of history, we find two ways out of crises on national and international scale: revolution or war, or even both. Over and over, this cycle of violence has repeated. It's up to this generation to meet the challenge and to break that pattern. Modern technology will be the key ingredient to success in this crucial endeavor. The interconnectedness of the world today is not only present in the financial markets that are now collapsing, we are also connected on a human level. Indians watched the disaster of Hurricane Katrina. Americans observed the Mumbai terror attacks in real time. By exploiting this shared sympathies and by uniting on a moral level, we can get through the crisis without fragmenting into violence and repression. We can dream of escaping the historic cycle of crisis and violence because we are witnessing one of the great milestones of global information shifts. Each major milestone of the distribution of information marked a landmark in the advance of human society. The invention of the alphabet and the written word brought man out of the Stone Age and allowed for the creation of a society. Written laws and contracts revolutionized political and business life as permanent objective records could be created. Thousands of years later, the printing press democratized the spread of information, making it much harder to control. Mankind moved into the modern scientific era when information became verifiable and universal, with the creation of common references. The internet is the next step on the path of universal information access. It's well on its way to establish boundless, instantaneous access to the sum knowledge of humankind and instant communication with anyone on Earth. Its impact on our society has already been dramatic, even though it has yet to fully penetrate the underdeveloped areas of our planet, where its effects will be the greatest, by far the greatest. What shape will this new revolution take? Often, such transformations begin with a major crisis, and we must rise to the opportunity. And we're witnessing today the global financial disaster. Liberating only one aspect of these global forces leads to great inequality. Globalization today means that finance has near total freedom. Trade is only partly free, while industry and labor are still very limited by strict controls. The protectionism in the trade of goods and movement of labor that punishes poor countries would never be allowed in the financial markets that benefit the richest countries. In the atmosphere, imbalances of hot and cold cause storms and hurricanes. The greater the imbalance, the greater the violence and the amount of energy released. The same is true in society. These massive global inequalities we are now colliding with great force. And our tired, old mechanisms and institutions will never be able to cope with these challenges unless the imbalances can be brought down. Now I have to say something about Russia and just share some of my experiences there. Because I've seen the importance of finding new frameworks in my new political career. And when I retired from professional chess in 2005, I had a new priority to bring democracy back to Russia. So I thought I should start small. In Russia today, we're fighting not to win elections, but to have elections. And it's a very difficult task compared to the normal political campaigning. With fragmented opposition, we needed a new framework for resistance. And the idea of our Other Russia coalition, mentioned a few times today here, that I helped to form in 2006, was to bring opposition members from every ideological faction. There were many different groups united against Augusto Pinochet in Chile at the end of the 80s. We brought together by our belief that restoration of democracy, free and fair elections, freedom of press, freedom of association and manifestations and gatherings are crucial for the success of our country. We all believe that if Putin regime survives, our country dies. And that's what brought together such different groups, different people who almost never agreed on anything before. And of course, with no access to the media, we have had to take to the streets. Those are the old marches. This is Russia. This is a little bit more violent. Yeah, I have to tell you that at such moments, I'm always dreaming about dangers of being mated in a complicated game of chess. So not only that we are a non-ideological coalition, but we also take ideas from any source that has proven successful in creating change. Of course, any group battling against a despotic government must look to your own Mahatma Gandhi. And I have a deep appreciation for the philosophy and practices of ahimsa, the non-violent resistance methods. You can see it from any video of our rallies in Russia that all of the conflicts were initiated by the police. Our motto was and is no single broken window. We believe that Russia has exceeded all limits for violence. Europe and America pretended Putin was some species of a democrat to promote their business interests. Of course, you can expect leaders to support their national interests to a certain extent. In France, Sarkozy promotes the oil company Total and car manufacturer Renault. In Germany, Merkel promotes Mercedes-Benz and Deutsche Telekom. And of course, Berlusconi promotes the companies of Berlusconi. I guess business is business. The Putin regime still has many defenders in Western governments and the media. They often say Russians need a strong leader, but there's something in Russian soul that is not compatible with democracy, or that we're not ready. Russia will never be a democracy, like the United States will never have a black president. And what about China and Taiwan? Or North and South Korea? Same people, different results. And at various points in the 20th century, you could say that Germany and Japan were not ready. And what about the most improbable history of India? Here was one instance of Winston Churchill, whom I greatly admire, being entirely wrong on the big issue of morality and political evaluation. Churchill could never imagine an independent India as the largest democracy in the world or as one of the fastest growing economies on earth. A failure of imagination is a virus that can infect even the greatest minds. And it is very often failure of imagination that ends or slows so many great and necessary endeavors. For years, with oil prices rising high every year, I had to listen to so-called analysts and experts talking about the wonderful Russian economy under Putin. Now the results are in. And what we see in Russia, Russia's fall is one of the worst. Even though the average price of oil in 2008 was almost, for Russian Brent, was almost $95 a barrel, 37% higher than in 2007. So it's not just the drop in the oil prices that made Russian economy thinking. There were fundamental wrongdoings and evils that were shown at the time when these oil revenues no longer could cover the mistakes and wrongdoings of the Putin's regime. So with no transparency and no accountability, the KGB incorporated business model is a failure, a total failure. That's why political freedom is a vital ingredient for innovation and change. Only in an open society can you have the social and capital adaptation that leads to improvement. And what does Russia have to show for a decade of record energy prices? A small group of Putin's oligarchs? At one point last year, according to Forbes magazine, the combined wealth of 100 richest Russians was more than twice the size of the annual spending of Russian budget. I don't think we should be proud of that. Industrial production this year has plunged 20%. It's past 6 months, in fact. Steel output alone is down more than 45% from early 2008. The Putin system, I always say, it's a bizarre mixture of Adam Smith and Karl Marx. The profits are privatized and expenses are nationalized. It's no longer taboo in Russia to speak openly of the post-Putin era, even among regime loyalists. The foreign businessmen and politicians eager to make a deal with Mr. Putin should bear in mind that in all likelihood, he will not be around long enough to fulfill his part of the bargain. Nor will the dubious deals he and his cronies are making in Russia's name for their own profit go unexamined after they are gone. Yesterday, we could see it on television. Hillary Clinton met with the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov in Geneva, trying to negotiate with a regime that cares only about staying in power. Hearing Hillary's statement at the press conference didn't give me an impression of change. It was more of a copy-paste of Condoleezza Rice. Again, they're trying to maintain the status quo instead of advancing an agenda of change. For Putin's Russia, status quo is selling weapons to terrorists and aiding Iran's nuclear program to maintain tension in the Middle East. That helps keep up oil prices, the key to Putin's survival. No deal the US makes is going to change that formula. The American Vice President, Joe Biden, recently said that US should press the reset button on its relationship with Russia. But a simple reboot is not enough. The operating system of Putin's Russia and the free world are simply not compatible. We have a deadly virus, and normal relations can only resume after it had been removed. So it's not about rebooting, it's about reloading a new software. And before I conclude, I have a little challenge for you. It's a simple question. Name a major world-changing invention from the last 30 years. Something created after Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs introduced the first popular personal computer, the Apple II, in 1977. Please don't say the internet, since its foundations were developed more than 40 years ago in the United States. And the first signal was sent from UCLA to Stanford in 1969. Cell phone, the first phone call was made in 1973, and actually the concept was patented almost 100 years ago. So with all the technology around us, it seems that we are progressing only incrementally, focusing on the convenience, but not on big ideas. Just imagine, NASA in 1969 went on the moon with less computing power than you have in your mobile phone today. For many years now, too much creative energy has gone into developing financial instruments and not actual engineering. The big jumps in the stock markets were not followed by jumps in productivity or technological excellence. Fake value created in the bubbles are not real progress. It's a distracted form of real industry. That incremental mentality has carried over into politics as well. The idea that we only need to make small changes in our own behavior and our own policies has been refuted. The financial meltdown, the global reach of terror attacks, these are not incremental crises, and they will not be solved by incremental thinking or incremental solutions. We must accept the fact that status quo is dead, that change is inevitable. We must build new frameworks to solve new problems instead of using obsolete tools. We cannot be afraid to throw away the old methods that no longer work. If we are afraid, we will wait. We will be doomed to wait passively until change is forced upon us in potentially most destructive ways. Courage is essential in every walk of life. Beginning with courage, with the courage to think creatively, especially in times of crisis. Fear comes in many forms related to decision-making. The fear of being wrong, the fear of change, fear of the unknown, the fear of hurting those who are important to us. Failure to control these fears always leads to slower and inferior decisions, and in turn, to greater fear the next time. We cannot be afraid to ask difficult questions because we are afraid on the answers. We are afraid that we receive the answers that we don't like or the answers that can frighten us. Time and again we hear, we don't have all the information, so we cannot take action. But there is always more information, so inconvenient decisions can be eternally postponed. Don't hesitate. Make the tough choices, or they will be made for you. To lead is to decide. So don't hesitate. Make the tough choices, or they will be made for you. To lead is to decide. Thank you very much.